I wouldn't take nothing from nobody that I don't have good intentions for, you know. It's your girl B Octavia. Welcome to my channel, or back to my channel if you are returning from a previous video. But if you do not know me, my name is B Octavia. I'm from Washington DC. I'm an entrepreneur and I also have my own business. Now today's video will be a recap of Azie Faison's recent Vlad interview. And when I say a recap, I'm not going to really talk about everything that was mentioned in his interview, but I will be giving a brief description of each part. I did watch each part, and I also watched the full thing just in case it was things in between that I might have missed. But quite a few people have been asking me my thoughts on Azie's interview and what was talked about. A lot of people aren't a fan of Vlad, and I wouldn't per se say I'm a fan of anybody, you know what I'm saying? I could respect what somebody does though, and I think that that's where I'm coming from with it, in giving Vlad some positive and constructive criticism. I think that a lot of people label him as like a culture vulture and things like that, and they don't really explain why they feel like that. They just outright say it, and that's their truth, you know. So everybody is entitled to their own opinion, and that's why I want to speak my piece on Vlad, and that will be happening throughout the video, as well as right before I start talking about what we really supposed to be talking about. So number one, I find Vlad's interviews and who he chooses to interview as very interesting. He gets a lot of important people, you know, in front of the camera, and important things are discussed. It's a certain way that certain YouTubers and bloggers have played it safe in doing YouTube and speaking their mind, hiding themselves off of camera. They maybe wouldn't call it hiding. I don't think Vlad would call it hiding, and he may have a really good point, you know, or reason why he does that. But I do feel like a lot of people play it safe when they, you know, when they're off camera talking their piece versus on camera. We see their face, we see how serious they is, and they talk that talk because it's gonna be out online, you know. It's a certain level of respect that I have for somebody who's interviewing somebody to be on camera too, or who's speaking their mind and they're speaking it on camera, you know. But that's just my thing. Within the recap of this interview, there were a lot of things that were already talked about in the previous interview, and that was a huge pet peeve for me. A lot of different things could have been talked about. What is Azie working on now? You know, how does he feel about his past? Not just how does he feel about Alpo's death and past, you know, and what Alpo was wrapped up in. You got to create a balance of them talking about their personal lives or them talking about what they're working on versus talking about other people and what they was working on, you know. So that's just what I think. I'm gonna basically give my recap of the recap, okay? Because I do understand that this is a recap interview, but it don't take nothing for people to go watch the previous one to make sure that they caught up on that, then to talk about everything that was discussed in the first one. So part one, who Azie learned from, and who he learned from was Bumpy Johnson's bodyguard. And that's something that we didn't know, you know what I'm saying? That's something that wasn't discussed in the first one, which is good. And I feel like it's always the person that you least expect in the game to teach you the ropes, to teach you what to do and what not to do. And that ends up being probably more profitable and more successful than you learning from one of the bosses or one of the heads of the organization. Most times it be like that. Part 2, Vlad being curious on Rich Porter owning cars at 15. And to me, that's not really important. You know, speaking on the life of Rich Porter and his ultimate demise, I feel like something like talking about what the money was spent on is kind of irrelevant. It's almost like it falls into when people be saying that, oh, you're glorifying the life, you know, you're glorifying what they had to do to get those cars. It falls along those lines because if I remember, AZ did not bring that up. It was almost like Vlad was like, well, is this true? You know, is this true that he owned these cars at this age? Not important to talk about in this, you know. Basically everything that glitters is not gold, and that's what I'm hinting at. I want people to see it for what it really is and not just see it for all of the materialistic things that you can get, because it can cost you a lot more than anything materialistic. You know, being in that game could cost you your life. It could cost you years and years away from your children. So it's nothing to glorify. Part 3 was how AZ got his start in the drug game. And this was already talked about, but he did go into more detail. Something that I caught within the interview and looking at the parts was, it was almost, you know, borderline annoying for Vlad to be trying to tell the story to AZ himself, because I get it, you know, you've watched the documentaries, I get it, you've maybe read his books, I understand that you've watched the movie, but let him tell the story, you know what I'm saying? Let him tell it from his mouth. It don't always have to be a is that true type of thing. Just ask the question and just let them go. I feel like that's why people be irritated sometimes, because it could almost be like they trying to tell the story and you are cutting them off, you know. Part 4 was Rich Porter doing 1 year in prison for the gun charge. It was a shootout. Already talked about as well was crack hitting Harlem. I think that that would be more interesting for a person that was affected by it, like their parents got hooked on it. I think that that's a better perspective to ask somebody of. Their family member got on it. Maybe the family member stole their money. Like, get somebody else other than a dealer to answer that. And I mean that in all respects, because it's like I want to hear different perspectives on how it affected somebody, you know, in a negative way. It affected their family. It forever changed their family, versus how it positively affected a dealer, you know, or a past dealer. You know, I'm not saying dealer in the present tense, but you know exactly what I'm saying. I want to hear a lot of different perspectives on when it hit in different generations as well. The crack epidemic hit my family too, so it's like I don't want to just hear of a dealer talking about it. Yeah, it was crazy. It was a lot of money, you know, going into their pockets, but at the same time, you know, just think of how much money was coming out of families like mine, you know, families all across the world and in these urban communities. That's something that I want to hear. Maybe that's just me, you know, but to keep hearing him ask that of dealers, and it maybe influenced them in the wrong way, but it gave them financial stability and things like that, even if it was for a certain amount of time. Some people just did not have that, you know, within those years or within their age bracket, you know. So part 5 was AZ speaking on his profits in the drug game per week, which is something that probably was talked about in the first interview, which did not need to be mentioned again. 9 times out of 10, if a person was acquiring that much, they won't acquire that much anymore. So I just wouldn't want to be reminded of that, you know, because things do slow down, you know. People don't always, if they was a dealer, people don't always make that same type of money, you know. So that's just something to be mindful about, and in not reminding people where they came from financially and how good they felt about it and things like that. I don't be wanting to talk about profits. I don't want to be, and that comes into play when, oh, is that true? Like, you was making X, Y, and Z. Is that true? That's some barbershop talk. You know what I'm saying? Maybe it's about that. Maybe, you know, it's a man thing and that's why it was talked about. But to me, that's something like my mindset, generation of the late 90s, like, that's not my mindset. That's not what I would want to ask, and that's not what I would want anybody to focus on. Now, part 6 is Alpo getting out of prison before Rich. Rich and AZ collectively looking out for Alpo. I mean, this was something that was talked about in the previous interview, but it was gone into more detail, I suppose. And when I'm saying that, it's of no fault of AZ. It's how the interview is constructed. That's really what I'm focused on, and that's why I'm breaking it down the way that I am. So, Alpo getting out of prison before Rich, he got out, he approached AZ and mentioned that he knows Rich and he's cool with Rich, and Rich told him that he was going to look out for him, whatever. So, AZ, being as thorough as he is, he waited for the call from Rich and got confirmation that Alpo was cool, and from Rich's word, AZ looked out for him. He made sure he was good, and he made sure he was on his feet as he was freshly released. And from that point, Alpo was doing his thing. It gets very interesting after part 6, and that probably will be in part 2 of me talking about this interview. There are quite a few parts, so I wanted to make sure that I was covering everything and also speaking my mind about how I felt about the interview. Part 2 will be more so of me really focusing on the parts and saving my thoughts for afterwards. So I'm gonna end this video off with talking about how I feel about part 5 and part 6. Now, everything that was mentioned in them parts only reiterates how much of a snake Alpo was to both of them. You know what I'm saying? I'll dig deeper into that. Some topics of discussions that I brought up in the past, like the night that Rich died, AZ was supposed to be next, was confirmed by him, you know what I'm saying? But that will be in the next part. What I want to say about 5 and 6 is it only reiterates how much of a snake he was to them, because they were so locked in with each other. Rich trusted the surface of what Alpo was showing him, and that only shows how good of a person Rich was. Like, I mean, AZ looked out for a lot of people that ended up turning on him, and that didn't stop him from being a good person to people, you know. That didn't stop him from being a good person in general, and that's something to note about AZ. It's a shame that, you know, usually when a young man gets out of prison, don't nobody look out for them. They don't got nowhere to turn, you know. They not making no type of money. They don't even have those type of friends to go to and things like that. And so for Alpo to have those resources, even if it was just a few people, that shit took him a long way. And it made him get on his feet enough to build off of that. You know, I for one would take this as a lesson to never bite the hand that feeds you, because if they don't get you, karma gonna get you. If they don't get you, God gonna see it, and that's the highest of all. I don't want God to see me doing no foul shit like that. And I wouldn't take nothing from nobody that I don't have good intentions for. You know, you don't accept nothing from nobody or ask nothing from nobody if you don't have good intentions, or if you can't keep good intentions for them. You know, it's something to be noted, and it's a huge lesson that I took from those parts. So we on to part 2. Part 2 will be next, and then I have Michael Franzese and Sammy the Bull to talk about. So let's just jump right into what we gotta do. I will see y'all in part 2. Thank you for watching this video. It's your girl B Octavia, and I'm gone.